But my question is, do you understand Itigidi, the language? No, I know 3 words. I know Samo.
That's a good one. Thank you.
So Samo. Are there more Itigidi people here? More of my husband's people. Okay. My husband's people are here, so I'm safe. But also I should say, every time my husband's hometown is mentioned, Itigidi, which is, by the way, a really wonderful town, we also have to balance it and mention Aba, my own hometown, in Anambra State. But it's interesting thinking about your question between Ngozi and Chimamanda. And you know, often when you have children, many children, and you're asked, who is your favorite? You have to say, I love all of them equally. Even though we know that many parents have favorites, right? But they have to kind of pretend. So I'm going to say I love both names, but that's not actually true. The real reason is Chimamanda is a name that I gave myself. And the story is a little bit long, but maybe I should tell it so that the students can hear it, yes? Okay. So when I was born in 1977, the names that were my birth certificate were Ngozi Grace. Grace was my mother's name. And so as I got older, I always felt that Grace was my mother, not me. I think Grace is a very beautiful name, but it never felt like my name. And so I was Ngozi. But even then as a child, I felt that Ngozi, while also a beautiful name, was very common. I felt that 1 in 2 Igbo girls were named Ngozi. And I always felt that I needed something else that felt uniquely mine. And so then at my confirmation, I was reading a novel at the time, and the character in the novel was called Amanda. So I decided that this name was wonderful and I was going to be called Amanda. There were a few arguments with the hierarchy of the church concerning such things as that you must have a saint's name. So I made my case and I was allowed to have Amanda. And I remember the bishop looked a bit surprised when he saw my name when he was doing and then he said, Amanda, be sealed with the gift of the Holy Spirit. And I wanted to say, it's not Amanda, it's Amanda. But anyway, so then I was Amanda, and then I went to the US to go to school. And I noticed very quickly that there were many other Americans in my class called Amanda. But the worst part was how they pronounced the name. Amanda? And so one day someone was referring to me and I did not know. Because they were saying Amanda, and I didn't turn because I didn't realize it was me. And I think that it was but also during that period I had started to think about identity and what it means to be from where, to kind of own where you come from. And so I remember sitting in that class in the US and suddenly I thought, this name is not my name. This name belongs to other people, it's not mine. I'm not Amanda. And that's when I started thinking about how I could give myself a name that was an Igbo name, that had a real meaning, but also that had to have that word Amanda, because that word was already in my passport and my license and everything. And honestly, it came as a revelation. I remember exactly where I was, and that name Chimamanda came to me. And in Igbo, it means my God will never fall down. And so I just really felt that this was the name that I was given. You know, I gave it to myself, but I was also given the name. So the answer to your question, of course, I think is now clear.
Very clear. Great. So now we are aware that all has come out, and it's called Dream Count. What triggered that inspiration? Or are there multiple triggers of Dream Count?
Yes, there are multiple triggers. And I want to say thank you again to the brilliant young women for their performance. I'm not sure everybody quite got it, but what they did was in a lot of what they said, they found very clever ways to weave in titles of my novels and my short stories. And it just really was very cleverly done. So thank you again. And I also love how they kept the expression dream counting kept recurring. And it's difficult for me to talk about a single inspiration because I always have multiple inspirations. As a storyteller, I'm always watching the world. I'm always watching. I'm always very alert to the big things, but also to the small things. I have a notebook. Actually, now it's my phone. I used to have a notebook. But I'm always writing things. So I'm watching, I notice something. It can be the color of your shoes, which are very cool, by the way. And then I would make a note. And maybe in a novel in 10 years' time, there's going to be somebody wearing shoes like that. So it came from many, many things. But really, I wanted to write about, and the students referred to this idea of dreaming and who gets to dream and who thinks that their dream will count and who thinks that their dreams will not count. And, what does it even mean to dream? I'm very interested in, and for me, I understand dream in a very expansive way. I don't just mean, you lie, you sleep, and you dream. No. I mean the hopes we have for ourselves, what we think that we deserve, what we aspire to, all of those things. So, but most of all, I think I wanted to write about women. I wanted to write about women's lives. I think this is the first novel that is very focused on women's lives. I think all my other books have been, I think about both men and women. But this is the book that I really wanted to write about contemporary women's lives in a very honest way.
Okay, thank you. Now, I'm sure you've, most of the audience would have heard about it. One of Africa's greatest writers from Kenya, Ngugi wa Thiong'o, just passed on some few weeks ago. And just yesterday, Professor, our critic, Charles Nnolin, also passed on. Charles passed on yesterday. And there is this always conflict, as it were, between the writer and the critic. And you are about pushing this novel out. What do you think should be the relationship between writers and critics, given the fact that, of course, Nnolin was very critical of Achebe, and always felt Achebe was just telling stories that his grandmother told him. And he's passed on. So, and Achebe has said that he saw in you a young writer with the skill of ancient storytellers. And in your encounter with Achebe, you also acknowledged that you revered and couldn't even have the courage to look at him face to face when the work is out. What do you think critics should be saying about dream count?
Well, I think I should start by saying that may the soul of the critic, Professor Nnolin, rest in peace. And also I want to say that he was completely wrong about Chinua Achebe. But at the same time, I think his reading of Achebe, while I disagree very strongly with it, should exist. So I really believe in multiple perspectives. I think the relationship between a writer and a critic should be one of mutually ignoring each other. I think, because really I think looking at literature creatively and looking at literature as a critic are two very different things. But I think that they're important. Both are important. And I, of course, look at literature as a creative person. And so, when I was in secondary school, I didn't always enjoy my literature classes because I felt that they were almost too technical, too much about the theme. But I wanted to talk about the characters. There's this idea that of literature being really a way for us to gossip, but to gossip with the most elevated language. There is something deeply gossipy about the best literature. And I think that critics don't seem to recognize this, and I quarrel with that. So I think that I don't think about critics, honestly. I respect that critics exist. I respect the work that they do because they bring very valuable insight to literary works, but I don't actively think about them, and I don't think creative people should, because often you can start to change your own artistic vision because you're thinking that Nolim is going to say I did not do something right. So let me change this now from my grandmother's story. Even though actually the story that is calling you is your grandmother's story. I think Chinua Achebe did something remarkable with just that novel, Things Fall Apart. I mean, he changed the world.
That's right.
And we cannot, it's something that there's no way that you can reduce that. It's what it is. And so I don't know what the critics, I mean, I know the book has been reviewed widely. I'm told that the reviews have been very good. I don't read reviews. But, critics, I respect them, but I will always face my front.
Thank you. Okay. A woman. She's a wife. She's a writer. She's a public figure. And above all, you have to be the mother that you are. And some of these young girls will be wondering, how are you combining all of these roles? How are you juggling them? And how is it that you're able to get to where you are with all these multiple roles that you have to play? And I'm sure they would like to know how you do it so that knowing that you have inspired them and they look up to you like a model, can you share your secrets with them before we allow them to join the conversation?
Okay. Well, you see that because he's an almost an Itigidi man, he mentioned wife before mother. You see the problem. Please, can you mention mother first?
It's the wife that makes you a mother.
Okay, I think you've won that argument. I think if I have anything to say to young women, obviously I have many things to say, but in this particular case about having different rules, it is to say to them, you can. But the other thing is, you might not be able to do all of them as perfectly as you want, but that's okay. Part of being a mother, which I think for me has been the greatest gift I've been given, is that sometimes you feel guilty. Sometimes you feel that you want to be there 24 hours a day for your child, but you can't. And in fact, it might not be a good thing for your child. I think it's a good thing for your child to see you doing things in the world. You inspire your child by going out and doing things, whatever it is. From the woman who sells pepper to the woman who's running for president, that child is inspired by seeing the mother. I know how much it meant to me to see my mother, who was a wonderful mother. My mother was a fantastic mother, but she was also a woman with her own ambitions. And so she became the first registrar of the University of Nigeria. But I never felt for one day that my mother was not there for me. And so we can do it all. What I want to encourage you, though, in particular, is whatever it is you want to do, do it well. Don't put in any half-baked effort. If you're going to have children, put in everything. If you're going to pursue, you need to put in everything. So what I try to do, I'm going to leave out wife for now. Because these Cross River people, I think they need to add money to the bride price. So but my writing, when I was younger, I didn't actually dream about things like getting married. Honestly, I had friends who would say, my wedding dress. I never thought about the wedding dress. I just wasn't interested. I read books, and that's what I loved doing. And I had arguments. I was very good at arguing about everything. And I encourage you, by the way, especially young women, speak up. Speak up. But always speak up from a place of knowledge. So before I have opinions about almost everything in this world, but before I air them, I go and do my homework. So if you ask me what I think about something and I don't know about it, I won't tell you anything, but I'll go back and read. I'll go back and learn. And so, often I find that in public spaces, men generally are more confident about speaking up. Women are generally more, apologetic. Don't be. Speak up. And all of these roles, you can do it. You don't have to be perfect. You can be a mother as long as you love your child with your whole heart. That's it. Because love will propel you. Your love will propel you to do what you need to do for your child. And it's so important, I think, for a woman to have what she does, for a woman to have her own. And it's not just about, have money in your pocket so that he's not giving you money for, no. I mean, just a sense of self-fulfillment. Have something that you do. It doesn't matter what it is. And do it well. So I really think it's very doable. And as for the wife, just manage your husband.
I hope you're not managing us.
The husband it's really important who you choose. It's really important who you choose. Young women choose wisely. Sometimes as young women, you can tell that the person you're with is not really a good person, but you're desperate to get married. You're desperate to have somebody who's your partner. Don't settle. Be very careful who you choose. The person you choose as your life partner will make a huge difference in your life. If you choose somebody who's kind, somebody who's supportive, it will make all of the difference. And so I can tell you that I chose well. So.
Yes. We are good people.
There's some good men left there.
Thank you.
Okay. My name is Chimboyem Uzodimma, a theology department lecturer. Chimboyem, yeah. So, Chimamanda, I consider today a blessed day to have seen you. I have always dreamed of meeting you in person. I'm happy that it is possible today. I've read a lot of your work, and I have questions, a million questions for you, but I will just take two. One is from a character from one of your books, Purple Hibiscus, a character I loved so well, Beatrice, the wife of Eugene. And so I want to ask you a question about that character. And that question has to do with the abuse of female bodies and mode of resistance. In Purple Hibiscus, Beatrice's act of poisoning her husband is a pivotal moment in her resistance and journey towards freedom. Could you elaborate on your rationale for choosing this particular act of resistance, the poisoning of her husband with rat poison, for your character?
Thank you.
Did you consider the ethical implication of such violent resistance to domestic abuse? What alternative paths towards freedom and empowerment might you have considered for her?
Thank you.
This is one question.
Thank you. Yes, we'll take three before she responds. We'll take three.
This is one question. I have
Please,
two.
please, no, that's okay, that's okay. So others, yes, please, the mic first.
They're thinking about all of the problems and all of the challenges they have. Right, and I think if you're really committed to writing, you have to make the time. When I was in college, when I was in university in the US, I was full-time student. I was also taking care of my nephew, which was also a full-time job. But I made the time to write. So sometimes, I would cook, put him to bed, and then I would do my school work, write a paper or whatever. And then I always would add an hour or two. So often I would go to bed at 1 o'clock in the morning because I was determined to make time to write every day. So often it meant I didn't have as much of a social life, but I wasn't really interested because what mattered to me was the writing. So I think that if you consider yourself an upcoming writer, you have to really make writing matter. And it means that you have to be willing to sacrifice something for the writing. And write every day. Sometimes it won't be good. It doesn't have to be good every day. Write. And to the young man who made the big mistake of calling Nsukka a village, we're coming after you. But I appreciate your question because I think it's, and the simple answer to your question is yes, that of course I think it's important to remember that everyone who's achieved something had some obstacle. If they didn't, then they're lying. But the question I want to ask you is your dream a specific dream? You said, I want to be great. But is it, I want to be great at? Or is it just, I want to be great? Because it makes a difference. If it's a specific dream, I really respect that, and I urge you to, yes, Nigeria is hard. Nigeria has always been hard. But people have managed to push back. And push back. If you have a specific dream, do your best, do your homework. I really believe in homework. So software engineering, which I don't know very much about, obviously, but I'm sure that there are courses online that will elevate you I'm sure that there are things that you can, so instead of maybe going to a Burna Boy concert, take that money and do a course online that's going to put you on a higher level, so that if you decide to apply for graduate school, for example, just that you have that in your resume might be the thing that pushes you over. Just do more. Take 4 more steps forward. Nigeria is hard. I know that. We all know that. But I think maybe it's time for us to say, don't stop the sentence that Nigeria is hard. Continue with but. Nigeria is hard. Do a comma, not a full stop. But I will do it. It's really important, because, I think it's also important for us to remember there's so much, every time I'm home, I'm just moved by the innovation, the energy of this country, the intelligence, the talent, right? It's up to us to do the most that we can. It's unfortunate that this is what we got. None of us signed up for a country like Nigeria, right? We all want Nigeria to be better. It's not, right? Things are terrible. Like, people are hungry, but don't let that be the thing that holds you back. I want in 10, 20 years to see your name somewhere as the leading software engineers doing something. I'm serious. So let's break away from the sedate Catholic mode and be a big Pentecostal. So manifest it. And the other question, sister's question, which amused me, because it almost felt as though sister was warning me a little. And I think sister was saying, really, sister's question is, but don't you think that you're encouraging other women to use rat poison? And why not something? And well, I think the first thing I will say is, it was the character, not me. Let's remember that. But how I read that character, and I think that multiple readings are valid, but how I read that character is that her act was an act of resistance, but it wasn't really for her, it was for her children. That act was a violent act, it was an extreme act, but it was also an act of a woman who had been beaten down to the most abject submission, and who did not want her children to live in the shadow of what her life was. I don't think Beatrice is ever going to be a full human being, but she wanted differently for her children. And, when you ask, shouldn't I have thought about what other options did she have? I think it's easy when we talk about women who are in terribly abusive relationships, when we say, why don't they just leave? But the psychology of abuse is very different. It's very difficult for women who have been in relationships that are so unhealthy to just get up and leave. They don't even have, many of them don't even have, they're not able to psychologically. So I think Beatrice is a character who would never have been able to get up and pack her things and tell her children we're leaving. Not in the shadow of a man just as impressive, in many ways as Eugene. So I think that she did what she thought she could. I'm not encouraging rat poison, no. Unless the situation is very bad. No, please, it's a joke. All of you young people, please do not put on social media that Chimamanda said you should kill your husbands with rat poison. Please, it was a joke.
Thank you.
I have experienced it. That is the reason Dream Count took 12 years to write. And I think it's part of the creative process to sometimes have these dry spells, right? And it's very difficult to experience, but you just have to tell yourself, you can't always be producing. Otherwise, in some ways, it becomes watered down, doesn't it? So this is a positive way to think about it, that when you have that dry spell, hope that it will pass. What did I do? I found myself rereading books that I love. And I also read a lot of poetry, because I think that poetry is very good at reminding you of what language can do. So even though I don't write poetry, but I read a lot of it because I was reading it as an act of hope, because I hoped that my own words would come back. And I think, at some point eventually they did. But also I just really believe that my mother's spirit helped me write this book. So pull from everything that you can while hoping that it will pass. Good luck to you. And so I'm curious, we don't have a lot of time, because I would really go deep into your question, and there are a number of premises that I want to quarrel with. right? And I think one of them is this idea. So you said, oh, people say, oh, she just wants to assert herself. Why is that a bad thing? If a woman just wants to assert herself. I mean, I think that if the idea that we would say that as something that we all understand is not a good thing, I mean, I want to question that. Why would it be? I've never understood why it is something considered threatening that a woman wants to assert herself. Or I've never understood why often when African men bring up the idea of culture, it's because they're very desperate to hold on to a certain kind of privilege that they're unwilling to share. Because when you really think about it, I mean, all of this talk about culture is because African men have grown up in many cultures that have taught them that simply by being born male, they have access to many things that women don't. They have privileges. And it's not to say that men's lives are easy and perfect. Not at all. Men have their own problems. But compared to women, which is really what justice movements are about, it's not that the person... so I want to use an analogy of race, for example. When I think we live in a world that is still largely racist in many ways. I think that the parts of the world that are white still largely think of the parts of the world that are not white as kind of inferior. When we want to address that, we recognize it's a justice movement. And because it's the non-white people who have been, oppressed, left out, we focus on them. I find it amusing. So I often talk to a lot of men who are very fierce in their fight against racism, right? They understand it. Once you bring up gender and sexism, they're like, but why are women making noise? There's no problem. But they use exactly the same language that white people use when black people are talking about racism. And I think, the question of shouldn't African feminists focus on Africa? When a man says that, I'm sorry, what he's really saying is shouldn't she maybe lower her voice? Because our culture says that she's still, men and women are equal, but men are a bit more equal. That's what the male supporters of African feminism believe. And for people like me, my belief is that men and women are different, but they're equal. They're equally human. They should have equal access to whatever political, whatever. But the only differences we should actually think about are the biological differences. So for example, obviously men cannot take maternity leave, but they should actually take paternity, but it should be shorter because their bodies did not do the work. So so I just really believe that there is something wrong with the idea that we should think about what fundamentally is a justice movement. It's because we give it these names, and feminism is a word that has so long been vilified, and not just in Africa, all over the world. Western feminism and its history is one in which, women who in the UK, when they started agitating to be allowed to vote, and let's also remember, you could not vote just because you were born a woman. Let's even just go back to Western history. That people talk about the Renaissance as such a central part of. Women were not part of that. The Industrial Revolution. Women were not part of that because they were women. Not because they were not intelligent, not because they were not capable. They weren't allowed because they were women. And so, it's also important to think about how much we have lost as a human race because of all of these centuries of excluding women. I think of feminism as the dictionary definition. And the reason I do that is that I think we need a word to rally around. And I understand that feminism, the word, is also very politicized, but that doesn't interest me. If you go to America, they talk about first wave feminism, second wave feminism, third wave feminism. All of that bores me. For me, the root of my feminism is my great-grandmother. My great-grandmother in my village in Izia by Naba was known as a troublemaker. She was called headstrong. But you know why? Because she spoke up and fought back. My uncles and my father would tell me this lovely story of how her husband had died and his people wanted to take away her things. I think this is a story that we're very familiar with. And she went around the village singing. But just saying the most horrible things about these people who wanted to take things, but she was singing in the nicest voice. That's resistance. Where is sister? Sister's still here. That's a kind of resistance, right? And she was called a troublemaker because she fought back. And she was fighting back for what was right. So I think it's important for us to place feminism not as something where, women want to assert themselves, women want to show, as a justice movement. There's so much that has been, there's so much that women, simply by being born female, have been excluded from. And we need to fix that. There's so many, I observed something a few days ago in Lagos. A woman was driving. A man caught in. He was wrong. But he wound down and shouted, "Prostitutes!" What's the male equivalent of that? No, but really, there isn't a male equivalent. And partly it's because there's certain words that we use to demean women that just don't even apply to men. I did an interview in the Netherlands years ago, and I was shocked by it. And it was supposed to be one of the big TV journalists. And it was when Mr. Trump, this was his first term, when he had said, you grab them by the, I'm even shy to say it in front of Father Chu. So anyway, you grab them by the woman's reproductive parts, right? And so I was talking about this with this man, and I said to him, which was a mistake, I said to him, imagine if you reverse that, and a woman said, oh, you can go around grabbing men by, and you know what this man said to me? That would be wonderful, wouldn't it? and so, but what that moment taught me is that we cannot, it's too easy to say, let's reverse it. And the reason is that men already as a group have power. So if you reverse it, it often doesn't, it's not the same thing. So we need to think about women's situations in the context of women. You know, your question about, and you saying that you're a feminist, you know, we welcome you, but the problem with you men feminists is that sometimes you people think you know feminism more than us that are suffering it. So I hope that as your feminism, you're following women, talk to her so that she can tell you her experiences. You know, one of the things that I found really interesting, I don't know how many of you followed the Me Too movement. I mean, there wasn't much of it here in Nigeria, but you know, all over the West, which really was a storytelling movement because women were finally telling stories that they had kept quiet about for a long time. And I think what struck me the most about that was how shocked men were. I have many friends, men, who said, that can't be happening, that can't be true. Women get harassed like that. They get, really? No. But it's because they don't know. Women know what they're going through. Many women don't talk about it. And so I think it's too easy to say that we have to think about complementary, what you made up from complementary, instead of thinking about competition. I don't see a problem with competition. But it depends on what we're competing for, right? I want men and women to be able to compete using their brains equally. Of course, we can't compete equally when it comes to sports because, you know, God decided to make men in general physically stronger. In fact, the physical strength of men is the basis of sexism, right? Because, anyway, I don't want to go on and on. I think I've answered your question. Yes? No?
Yes.
Yeah, I think I have. Think about subjects like male fragility. I don't understand. Honestly, I don't understand. So here's the thing. If I had talked a lot about my father and my grandfather, I don't think a lot of women would get up and tell me, well, what about your there's something that, there's an entitlement to space that men have that puzzles me to no end. And women don't have it. And I think that men should come towards the center a little bit. You know, let go of that fragility. Everything is not about you. And women, maybe learn, no, but honestly, because a lot of the questions I get, first of all, you cannot know me and say that I don't talk about my father. So you need to watch more things. My father, anybody who knows me well and has read me knows how much my father meant to me. My father, I was a complete and utter daddy's girl. And also in that interview, if you remember, I said that one of the major feelings that I've left with in my grieving process, which is ongoing, is that I think I took my mother for granted. And I have deep regrets about that. I was so busy being a daddy's girl and adoring the ground that my father walked on, that I just thought my mother was just there forever. And so I've talked about how it's important for young women to really nurture and cherish and nourish the relationship with your mothers. It's very, mother-daughter relationships can be very thorny. You're going to regret it if you don't make sure that pay attention to it now. If you have your mother, pay attention to it now. Make the most of it. And so, to the question, yes, I was inspired by my mother and my grandmother, as I should be. And I'm sure you were inspired by your father and your grandfather. No, honestly, I think this is why I say that feminism is a justice movement, that we have to get to a point where it becomes ordinary to think that both women and men are at the center of the world, not just men. Because if we think like that, there's certain questions that will not happen, because it will be ordinary, right? This question about what is the role of the father in a feminist household, the role of the father is the role of the father. I think that parents, a father and a mother, raise a child, and it really depends. It's always about context. The story I told about my mother, which is that my mother was the first woman to be registered. And at her first meeting, the sign said chairman, because it had been men who had occupied that position until she did. And so somebody wanted to change it and put chairperson. My mother said, no, leave chairman. And when she told me this story, which inspired me greatly, her point was, I didn't want them to think that I was doing anything differently from what the other people had done. Because sometimes if you change the label, people think that even the content has changed, and she did not want that. And when you're the first, women who are firsts in different positions know that in some ways you have a double burden. People are looking at you and waiting for you to prove yourself, especially as a woman. So my mother did not want to start out with anybody, even anybody at all, even the person serving them meat pie, to think that somehow because a woman was doing the job, it was now a different job. But that's about context, because in many other contexts, women would not want to be called chairman. And so I've always made the case that feminism is always about context. There isn't one answer fits all for everything. It's always about context. And so yes, that inspired me very much. My grandmother I continue to talk about. I hope that you will talk about your mother a bit more, because I suspect that you don't. But I wish we had more time to talk about male fragility. I mean this on a serious note, and I don't mean this to be, I don't mean this in a demeaning way, and I don't mean it in a personal way either. I think it's a. Thank you.
Yeah, and you have said a lot. Just one question from me. Women aspiring to occupy offices in Nigeria, would they be inspired if they jump into reading Dream Count this time? Sorry, it's a bit funny, but
no, it's not. It's interesting. I hope there will be.
No, question.
I hope there will be, because I think that this is a novel that I hope will remind people of their dreams. I think all of us, I mean women of course, but also men, we all dream, right? And I think sometimes, yeah. Where?
Cut this flow. Okay, now women aspiring to go into politics in Nigeria and Africa.
Yes.
How will Dream Count inspire them? Sorry.
Okay. Yes. I think that Dream Count is a novel that I hope will make people remember their dreams. So we all dream. Women, men, we all dream. And sometimes we put our dreams in our pockets because we don't think that they will come true. And I think it's important to just keep dreaming. And so I hope that this novel inspires everyone, but of course, particularly, as you've asked, women who want to run for office. It's a very difficult thing to take on in a country that doesn't have many examples, many successful examples to look up to. But I think just being reminded that as a human being, you dream, right? And it's worth holding on to that dream. It's worth trying, because you never know.
Okay, how much has the escalation of
where you spend contribution, like writers?
Can we ask like two questions so that she can answer?
Yes.
Okay, please, when you spoke that the issue of feminism has been politicized, what do you mean? And secondly, you were trying to say that
Feminism is associated.
that many women, that the country
has lost
a
so much
lot because of women's exclusion. Can you shed more light on it?
It's not just the country, it's the world that has lost a lot from women being excluded. When you think about it, there are women, men and women are granted intelligence. So we cannot say that men are somehow automatically more intelligent than women. So when you think about all the intelligent women throughout history who have not been allowed to participate, who were not allowed to go to school, who were sent off to get married instead of getting educated, you realize that we have lost a lot, because who knows? Who knows if perhaps today we might have cured all different kinds of cancers if we had let these women get in. So what we have done as a society is that we have somehow cheated ourselves. So we've used half of the intelligence that God gave to us as human beings by excluding women. And so it's time, and this is why I say that feminism in the end is a justice movement. It's not about, it's not about fighting anybody, it's about it's a justice movement. And so when we have full inclusion of women, you're bringing in more talent, you're bringing in more...
Can we please give a resounding round of applause to our guests this afternoon?
When I say that it is politicized, what I mean is that people don't understand what feminism really means. People add all kinds of political meanings. Oh, it's a woman who wants to fight men, all of that. It's not. If you think about it, it's a justice movement in the same way that racial justice is a justice movement, the movement for people with disabilities, all movements that have excluded groups of people, that's the same thing that it is. It's a justice movement. Thank you.
Thank you.